I would probably agree with you that there's something very how to put this, very unusual happening with psychedelics. They appear to have some beyond material properties, or at least are a doorway to a beyond material experience. However, there are a large number of people, the sort of atheist, materialist, naturalist contingent, who would argue that the psychedelic experience is nothing more purposeless, that is nothing more than a purposeless hallucination, a sort of a fiction. So if I accept that it almost certainly isn't, but if somehow it was demonstrated that it was a fiction, would it change your perspective on their value or use, and if so, in what way?
Well, I'd say they couldn't do that.
They couldn't be. You mean? No.
It couldn't be proved any other way if they really went into it.
No. Yeah. Of course, it's something that there is that's because of it's basically beyond the limits of science. There's no way.
Well, it's not that they couldn't prove it wrong. It's that the tools and language are inadequate to actually deal with what they're trying to measure.
That's exactly. That's the best.
So they're coming at it already with using the wrong tools. Therefore, the results aren't contingent with our results, because we're coming at it with metaphysical tools here, philosophies and ideas and worldviews, and I think it only values for people who have already done some work in understanding the ego and what it really is. You know, if you haven't taken that step first, when you start taking psychedelics, you're haunted by your ego.
For me, the most important parts of the psychedelic experience are things that cannot be expressed in language. So if someone was to ask me about my experiences, I can tell them, I saw some interesting things, I experienced some interesting things, but the real meat of the experience, the thing that made it a profoundly changing and important one, were things that I lack the vocabulary, and perhaps the vocabulary does not exist for which I could describe these to people who haven't had the experience themselves.
But the problem is, you'll understand as well, and Aldous Huxley had this problem too, you know, as a writer writing The Doors of Perception, you know, trying to describe this mescaline trip to people as an expert of words. You know, he's trying really hard to describe it, and he comes close, but he even says it falls. Words cannot talk about this stuff. They can actually know, and I mean just know through direct experience with. This is where it gets, you need some Zen philosophy to get this duality problem here, the paradox of being somewhere else and here at the same time. But the paradoxes themselves aren't a problem. They just are, and that's how there is. You can't have one without the other. You can't. There wouldn't be anything without that. But if you're on psychedelics, you get that all of a sudden. It's not a problem anymore, you know.
Well, I think some paradoxes only appear to be paradoxes because of socialised beliefs that have been sort of rammed into us. And what I think psychedelics can do is sort of circumvent that societal education or sort of brainwashing, and sort of allow you to experience things sometimes without that to see what it would be like were you not brainwashed since birth by people.
Yeah, I believe Terence McKenna called them boundary dissolvers. And you go through a process of boundary dissolution when you're on psychedelics, which is basically all preconceived truths are suddenly challenged. All of them essentially, and it's incredible. It's
Well, I think it brings me on to something that I'm sort of interested in. One of the reasons I'm very interested in psychedelics is because they, at least on the surface, almost seem like they could be a pharmacological cure for the brainwashing of the New World Order. Some people take psychedelics as party drugs, and some people take them and go on a sort of profound spiritual journey. And it's not exactly clear to me what the difference between those two why do they affect some people in one way and some people the other? Do you have anything?
All I can give is my experience. I mean, I've taken in my lifetime about 10 tabs of acid in different doses, in completely different environments, both out in a club while at uni or in my room on my own. I've done it out in nature for full 10-hour days with a friend who's also on it, in forests all over the UK. But I found I was doing it to experiment. I mean, prior to this, I did a lot of salvia as well, the legal version, which you bong hit and then you have a 10-minute DMT style blast and then you come back.
Yes, although it's no longer legal now.
No, it's not. No, but this is that's the first one I ever did, and that wow, that really
It's fair. I thought salvia was exceptionally bizarre, fairly peculiar.
It is. I didn't really know this when I did it. My ego's being shattered. You have no idea. I'm going through a vortex, and I'm scared. I can't deal with it. And I need pulling back sort of thing. And then my second trick, you see, I'm laughing hysterically, which is a couple of years on, and I'm absolutely just... Well, it wasn't about a year on, half a year, something like that. But you see, I'm laughing hysterically on this drug, and I didn't know how powerful it was then, as I do now, with more knowledge on these things. For that to be my first psychedelic experience ever, I'm a fool. I don't know what that's done to me. It definitely it was insane. It's if not more trippy than DMT. It's on par with DMT. You have no idea. And that sent me to another dimension, yes. But did I understand it? No. I was a complete puppet at the time. I was really into culture. I didn't know who I was. I was really trying to find myself. I didn't know what I was. I was a people pleaser is what I was. I went with the flow in the crowd. I didn't really have any identity other than what I was trying to force myself to find, and I never found it until that experience when everything just collapsed. And I stopped. Yeah.
Well, I suppose that's something that psychedelics can do. Well, at least that's what a lot of people report, isn't it? Being able to find themselves in some sense, or get to a sort of a core comfortableness in their own skin afterwards. If there was somebody listening to this and thought, I've always wanted to try psychedelics, and they say they've got a bunch of mushrooms in their house or whatever it is they want to give a try, or maybe some salvia, are there any sort of circumstances, any sort of things they should think through, or environment that they should set up, or just some general advice for that sort of listener, do you think?
In terms of general advice, all I can say is don't do it alone for your first time, especially not salvia. Have someone there watching you. If you are going to do psychedelics, know first of all you're going to be fine. Nothing's going to happen to you at all, and you'll get through the whole process alive. Trust me, and it won't kill you at all. But be prepared to have your mind a little bit blown and astonished, and that can be a bit overwhelming. So be prepared for that. Very prepared for that. It won't kill you, but it will be a shock, especially DMT or salvia. A shock is the word. But if you are there and you do get through to somewhere strange and interesting and weird, have your wits about you.
I haven't really come across in the literature before, which was that on I think salvia and DMT, that is, if you're smoking DMT and not taking in ayahuasca, but something is different. But more sustained trips, something like LSD or ayahuasca experience. Something which they often don't talk about is the profound, the way that emotional states are amplified, and that's something to bear in mind and something to manage. And
it's incredible the things you can capture that you probably wouldn't otherwise notice if you weren't on the drug, especially if you're in nature, because everything gets a little bit felt depth very clearly on acid. So everything looks like a bunch of triangles laid on top of each other, all different colours. It's a very interesting effect when you look at trees, and you see the flower of life appear quite often in the canopy if you look up at the tree line,
I think for me, I completely did not appreciate nature. Or views. I remember when I was a young child, people were saying, like my parents and other older people would say, look at this view, and I'd be like, so? It's a bunch of trees, I don't get it. And then It was only after sort of being in nature on a hallucinogenic that I suddenly realised the way that trees were like these staggeringly complex solar panel machines with they're just amazing, and then they're really just one tree is complex enough to just completely blow your mind. You're in a forest, and holy crap, this is unbelievable. But I suppose that's what I sort of meant when I was saying before that I think the thing is that we've been taught to just go, oh, there's a tree, and you walk past it. But what psychedelics can do is they take away that conditioning. So you look at that actual tree, and it is amazing. It's not that the drug is making you feel amazed. It's that it allows you to perceive what is actually amazing.
But that's what it seems like. Yeah, it's not like the hallucination's coming out of me. It seems like I'm seeing what's there. You know, it's like something's been taken away from me. It's not that I'm being given a hallucination or something. It's like I said, you lose your ego and you're really confused about time. You have no concept of time anymore, and you realise time is really ticked into you, isn't it? It's not really something that exists. It doesn't exist independent of man.
I think partly it's to do the illegality is part of this. They can only maintain this facade if nobody can present a workable alternative. So you only have to look at what happened in Waco of the Branch Davidians. Now, I'm not advocating the Branch Davidian way of life as a good one at all, but it was certainly disconnected from the society or control grid which the rest of us in inverted commas tend to operate in, and they couldn't permit that, so they went in and they murdered them. Or to a certain extent, Cuba, I'd say, is has a somewhat similar design with regards to there is no way that America as a capitalist force could permit. It wasn't that they were frightened of communism falling, they were frightened of it being successful. Not that I think it probably would have been, but they certainly were fearful of that, because if it was really successful, then people would go and live in it instead of living in what is essentially a kind of corporate fascist neo-feudalism. I think partly the thing is that they want psychedelics illegal because they represent not only an alternative way of viewing the world, like they create an alternative which they don't want, but they also, I think, if taken further, they may lead to an alternative and workable way of life.
I've said in the past, in China, in the East, when these mystical experiences were understood to exist and accepted to exist, you know, people eventually see through the game. It's a phenomena which just happens to mankind, you know. In the West, like, it seems like you call this neo-fascist feudalistic world in the West is kind of they don't want people seeing through the game. They want people playing the game. You've got to keep up playing the game. The show must go on. That's that kind of thing. It must go on. I think the West is also terrified fundamentally of what would happen if we stopped playing the game. Because we don't believe, fundamentally, we don't have many mystical experiences in the West anymore. So we actually believe the game is real. We take it so seriously. We're deep in fear about it, because we don't understand that we can control the game. The game is in our hands, you know, but only if you know it's a game. We forgot that completely.